Sky Sydney, Festival Director of AFI Docs, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to our inaugural Catalyst Sessions. I recognize some faces in the room. I know some of you have been with us all day long, and we appreciate that. It's definitely been an exquisite day of conversation and inspiration, and it's quite wonderful to end on a high note of humor and politics. Essentially, the Catalyst Sessions are born out of the idea that films, particularly compelling documentary films, can serve as the starting point, or essentially the catalyst, for meaningful conversations where we touch upon the most urgent issues of our day. And even though there might be a sense that humor, and of course politics, may not immediately register as urgent, quite frankly, the idea of using humor as a way to bridge partisan divides is actually extraordinarily critical in this time of so much divisiveness. The festival is celebrating its 11th year, but this marks an incredible transformation for us as we're expanding significantly into DC, and thrilled to be here at the Knight Conference Center, an exquisite environment to launch these fantastic dialogues. But it's not merely an expansion for us. We are actually indeed returning to DC. The American Film Institute was created at the White House, and it's very symbolic for us to be returning nearly 50 years later, just steps away with one of its flagship programs, AFI Docs. So with AFI Docs, I want to acknowledge very significant new partner for our festival, Audi of America, who is now the festival's new presenting sponsor, and it is with their support that we're able to have this wonderful presence here. I'd also, of course, like to share my thanks to the Knight Conference Center and everything that the museum has done for us to have this beautiful location. But particularly, we have a very important partner for this panel and also across the board of the entire Catalyst Sessions, and that's the Bipartisan Policy Center. In fact, this conversation that we're about to hear is not simply something that's been sponsored by the Bipartisan Policy Center. It's been inspired by them and has been deeply built out of a very important mission for them. In fact, this is the program which is launching a significant initiative that they have that they'll talk about in humor and politics. We're also very lucky that the president of the Bipartisan Policy Center is going to be on our panel, Jason Boumet. So this panel, of course, is asking the question, what is the function of humor in politics? And it is inspired by a number of works in the festival, or actually one key work in the festival and another creative work. It's inspired by the film Herb Block, The Black and the White, which will in fact have its DC premiere this very evening here at the museum, made by George Stevens Jr. And briefly, the film looks at cartoonist Herb Block's career at the Washington Post, which spanned over 55 years and 13 presidencies, a time frame in which he won 3 Pulitzer Prizes, the Medal of Freedom, and he played a significant role in President Nixon's resignation. Our moderator for this afternoon session is Nick Galifianakis, an American cartoonist and artist since 1997 who has drawn the cartoons for the nationally syndicated advice column, Carolyn Hax, formerly Tell Me About It, authored by ex-wife, writer and columnist for the Washington Post, Carolyn Hax. Galifianakis illustrated the book Tell Me About It, Lying, Sulking, Getting Fat, and 56 other things not to do while looking for love. Things I can actually do. He's also illustrated a number of books by writer and novelist Andrew Postman. Without further ado, let's please give a warm welcome to Nick Galifianakis.
Is this on? Is this on? Does it need to be on? Can you hear me? It's better if you can't. Thank you, this is great. Standing room. No, actually, those are our panelists. It's not standing room. It's okay. I'm Nick Galifianakis. I'm your moderator today. My job is going to be to I'm like the mother whale. I'll just nudge the baby whales in the right direction here and there. Otherwise, when we get out of their way, I'm going to encourage more of a conversational quality to the talk. And we have 2 clips to show you. Which we're going to start with one after the introductions, and then we'll move on to another one a little ways in. And then at the very end, we'll open it up to questions for the audience, unless they're silly or mundane, in which case we're going to cut that off and go back to other people. I edit the column that Carolyn Hax writes in the Washington Post syndicated column, and I do the cartoons, standalone cartoons. They're relationship cartoons. which is sort of politics, relationships. There's a marriage. But calling me a journalist is sort of like, I'm the journalist equivalent, like Olive Garden is an Italian restaurant, and it's a little bit. So, we have a great lineup. Very, very bright and interesting commentators here. As you heard, the movie Her Block, Black and White, is premiering tonight. I hope all of you are trying to make the effort to see it, if not tonight, sometime soon. I was lucky enough to know Her Block. He was very encouraging. He used to send me little notes, and he did that. I found out that he did that not just for me, but as a local Washington Post cartoonist. He did that for cartoonists all across the country. A phenomenal mind, remembered everything and everyone he ever met, and told me, and Mr. Stevens will be able to speak to this, about 3 essential qualities which speak to our subject matter today. He says, well, you have to have the intellect and open-mindedness to capture your subject matter. Then you have to have the fire in the belly to care. And then you have to have the guts to get up, to stand up, and express it publicly. I have 2 or 3 of those things. They change on any given day. So I'm going to bring out the Her Block expert first. George Stevens, Jr. In a career spanning 50 years, George Stevens, Jr. has created a legacy of distinguished work as a writer, director, producer of motion pictures and television. In 1962, he became the head of the Motion Picture Services, the U.S. Information Agency, under the legendary Edward R. Murrow. And in 1967, he became founding director of the American Film Institute and continues to serve on the AFI Board of Trustees today. As a writer-producer, Stevens has earned 15 Emmys, 2 George Foster Peabody Awards for meritorious service to broadcasting, and 9 awards from the Writers Guild of America. Among his honor productions are, you ready? The Kennedy Center Honors, which he launched in 1978. The miniseries Separate But Equal, and The Murder of Mary Fagan, George Stevens, A Filmmaker's Journey, We Are One, the Obama inaugural celebration from the Lincoln Memorial, and the feature film, The Thin Red Line, which has one of my all-time favorite soundtracks. It was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. In 2008, he made his debut as a playwright on Broadway with Thorogood, which earned a Tony nomination for its star Lawrence Fishburne. He is also a successful author. Conversations with Great Movie Makers of Hollywood's Golden Age was published in 2005, and Conversations with Great Movie Makers, The Next Generation, was released in 2012. I'm waiting for Conversations with Relationship Cartoonists. Very short pamphlet you put out this week. The Board of Governors of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences voted in 2012 to present Stevens with an honorary Academy Award for extraordinary distinction or lifetime achievement. Currently, Stevens is producing the 35th annual Kennedy Center Honors, and his latest work, which you've already heard discussed here already, premieres tonight, the feature-length documentary on our beloved Her Block, Mr. George Stevens, Jr.
Thank you. Thank you.
One of us is from LA.
Where do you want me to?
Take any one of those 3 seats.
Okay.
They want me on the left and out of the way.
Okay.
Mike Farah from Funny or Die. As president of production for Funny or Die, Farah oversees the creative day-to-day operations for the premier comedy site. Along with Funny or Die's television and feature project, other television and feature projects. As part of Funny or Die, can you tell that I'm reading this for the first time? Can you tell that I'm reading for the first time? As part of Funny or Die for 5 years, Farrah has produced the award-winning videos Prop 8, the musical, and Between Two Ferns, starring my little cousin, Zach Galifianakis, among many other pieces. Under Farrah's leadership, Funny or Die's creative team produces over 20 original videos a month. He is also one of the executive producers of Funny or Die's Billy on the Street, which is hysterical, airing on Fuse. Originally from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and a graduate of Indiana University, Farrah began his career at United Talent Agency. In November of 2010, The Hollywood Reporter named Farrah one of the top 35 Hollywood executives under 35 pounds. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Farrah. Sir.
Shouldn't be on the panel with you. He's accomplished much more than I have.
Right. I introduced him first. I introduced Mr. Stevens first because this is a humor conversation. You know, this is Jason Grumet. If you're from North Carolina, it's Grumet. But today it's Grumet. The Bipartisan Policy Center. Founder and president of the Bipartisan Policy Center, or BBC, Grumet has worked at the intersection of policy and politics throughout his career. In 2007, with the leadership of former U.S. Senate Majority Leaders Howard Baker, Tom Daschle, Bob Dole, and George Mitchell, he founded BPC to develop, promote bipartisan solutions to the country's most difficult public policy challenges. From 2001 to 2011, Grumet directed the National Commission on Energy Policy, NCEP, which is now a former BPC project. I'm getting lost in the letters. Prior to leading the Energy Commission, Grumet was the executive director of NESCOM, Northeast States for Coordinated Air Use Management, a nonprofit association of air quality agencies in the Northeast. Grumet is a frequent witness at congressional hearings and regularly appears in print and electronic media. Grumet received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Brown University and his Juris Doctorate from Harvard University. You sound hilarious. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Grumet. Gentlemen, we're going to keep it loose. In fact, I should loosen my tie just to sort of, like I said, I want this conversational. If there's something really compelling, you feel like you need to interrupt and ask a question, afford something, just make sure it's short and smart. Otherwise, we'll keep it towards the end and we'll come back to your question.
Because we can heckle back, right?
Absolutely, we can heckle back. We can throw drinks at you. We have flowers up here, a pot, a vase. This is going to be very interactive that way. Okay, we're going to start with a clip from tonight's movie. And I think this will help us establish, because Herb Block, I don't know if you know, I mean, his life covered most of human history. Generations were born and died, and the guy was still working. And so I'd like to start with that clip as sort of the backdrop to what we're talking about, the role of humor in politics, of which he played a gigantic role. So if we've got it queued up, we'll start there, and then we'll start dissecting.
If someone had said, all right, what do you think that guy does for a living? You know, I might have said Vermont pharmacist, but I certainly wouldn't have said the most feared editorial cartoonist in the country.
There were many breakfasts that were spoiled every morning in Washington, D.C. because of Herb Block. he understood his role was to speak truth to power.
Herb Block is one of the touchstones of 20th century satire.
He had that instinct for the jugular and for the gut. He thought about these issues. He didn't simply take stuff out of the headlines.
He was an independent force in this city, in that newsroom, and in this country.
He wasn't afraid of the owners of the Post. He wasn't afraid of the White House. He wasn't afraid of the witch hunting committees in Congress. This is just somebody who charted his own course and was not afraid.
You would not have wanted to be Herb Block's enemy, because he was going to nail your hide to the wall.
Sometimes you'd open up the Washington Post and be like a punch in the face. If something wasn't fair, it upset him.
He believed in independence, he believed in liberty, he believed in freedom.
His loyalty was not to any party or politician.
He had a righteous feeling about what was right and wrong.
Herb was the conscience of the country. There is no question in my mind that this was so.
Herb had an understanding before the facts of where this was going to go.
Most of our colleagues at the Post didn't believe him. Herb believed it. I would even say it was more than a belief. He knew.
As the decades went by, he was right there on top of the issues.
His succinctness makes what we do on the Daily Show look kind of silly.
There ain't nothing like good old-fashioned 24/7 full-on journalism.
It was impossible not to see the incredible gift that he gave to America.
If we don't have voices like Herb Block's voice, we would survive as a democratic society that's fair, that's just, that takes account of all the needs of its people.
It's the humor that ultimately says, now that you've had your laugh, let's change.
Mr. Stevens.
Sir.
He's almost the perfect vehicle for talking about what we're talking about. Let me ask you something about Herb Block. Do you think he got his point across? And by that, I mean, was the message received?
I think so. At first 7 days a week, then 6 days a week. He was basically a reporter. And he followed the news, he followed history. And cartoon was his way of making his comment, although he also wrote 12 books.
Why do you think, and this will be for the three of you guys, why do you think that works? Why are we laughing at this stuff? I've come to believe that humor is one of the biological necessities. Just to get a little heavy. And I know you're actually, in spite of the resume, this is a very, very funny man.
I'm a biological necessity. So.
Everything that gives us pleasure has a biological home in our brains. And the theory is that it's necessary to survive, whether it's food and taste and like that, or sex and to reproduce and keep the species going. Humor, most probably, is the stress reliever. It helps us with adversity. It keeps us going. Otherwise, we'd be an anxious messes and implode. So I want you guys connect, one, to see if you actually believe what I'm saying, because I'm not sure I do, and to connect it to Herb Block, politics. We'll make our way to Funny or Die. Go for it.
Well, so I'll give you kind of I'll run with your biology and then a little politics. So it shatters the veil. I mean, laughter is a innate response that you really can't control. So there's something fundamentally authentic about laughter. And people are extremely interesting when they're authentic. Think about how interesting it is to watch people on the metro. People are fascinating. Because they don't know they're being watched. And laughter has that same kind of fundamental authenticity. And it's also about being surprised. I mean, the laughing response is, I think, a response to being shocked. And that's, I think, part of the human condition. It's that kind of spark that we evolved to. Politically, I guess I'd say two things. The fact that we can mock and ridicule our duly elected officials is essential to the idea of America. The fact that our leaders can laugh together used to be essential to their ability to get stuff done. And it's that piece that we at the Bipartisan Policy Center, I think, believe is one of the things that's lacking right now. It's why humor in politics is important to us, not just to be cool, but because we think it actually speaks to that kind of essential nature of the exhilaration of collaboration, which has been really lost, I think, in the last several years.
Herblock's need to comment then? Herblock's need to comment, was that, I've always felt that it was like stronger than his need to draw, for example.
I would think so. He had a view of the world, and like you, I knew him. Ted really got it, Ted Koppel. He kind of looked like a Vermont pharmacist. And, he wore a gabardine jacket and slacks, although he'd put on his white tie for the gridiron dinner. But he was a thinker, and he was so prescient. He did his first cartoon on Middle East oil in 1937. He was way ahead on civil rights. He was early on Hitler and fascism. And Bob Woodward, in talking about Watergate, he and Carl, they said Herb instinctively, because he'd known Nixon and followed him already for 30 years, 4 days after the Watergate break-in, Herb Black had this cartoon. There's the White House, and there's snow on the ground, and these footprints are all going to the front door of the White House. Bob and Carl said it took us a year to be sure of that, but Herb knew, and of course, he had the the capacity for caricature. That once he drew Joe McCarthy with that black beard, I hope everybody here knows of Senator Joseph McCarthy, one of the real demagogues of our political history. And it was Herb, after this McCarthy's Wheeling, West Virginia speech, he did this cartoon with buckets of tar and the Republicans being pushed toward it. And at the top, the first time the word was used, it said McCarthyism. So, he had a view of the world that he expressed in cartoon.
Well, so then to pick up on my very first question then about getting his point across, I'll throw it to Mike. Do the Herblocks of the world shape public opinion? Do they really?
Yeah, absolutely, especially with social media and just how connected the world is because of the internet. I think that's reached that in Herb Block's life probably could never have reached because of just the technology wasn't there and how people communicate and share things and even now revise things on themselves with mashups or making their own user-generated videos. I think the right message, if it connects with people, can inspire them to change and to create their own take on that material. And I think that's just really a testament to his legacy.
Is humor an effective mode of transportation? Because when we're chatting, when we're talking about stuff where the talking heads are I didn't mean to look at you when I said talking heads, are arguing
really
about politics, there's
especially because he's the sponsor.
Right. There's a politeness about it, a dance. You're not calling your opponent out. And does humor do away with the dance, cut through
Well,
it?
it lets you go to the essence, and it's certainly true with cartoons. But if you think back at some of the most memorable political lines, they're all pretty funny, right? So you look back to the Reagan, right, who was a master at this. And actually some of these were his own lines, which is, of course, what differentiates him from most of the wonderful political comedians today who are reading expensively created jokes. In the 1980 election against Carter, he said, a recession is when someone you know loses your job. A depression is when you lose your job. And a recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his, right? It was funny. In '84, when his age was an issue, he famously said in one of the debates that he was not going to make age an issue. He was not going to talk about Walter Mondale's, youth and inexperience. And it managed to actually, in both cases, kind of go in one kind of on offense to the core critique he had against Carter. And his only vulnerability in '84 was he too old? And he managed to grab it, own it, fearlessly hold it out there and say, I'm not afraid of you, and spike the ball. And that, those to me were some of the most memorable lines in recent politics, and they were both funny.
And so easy to see then, or easy to digest as true.
They felt authentic.
They felt authentic, which is true of the cartoons, in the case of political cartoons and Herblock, and with Funny or Die and social media today, you feel like it's getting the truth across? Is it shorthand for an increasingly, some might say, you're nodding, what am I going to say? An increasingly distracted populace?
Well, I probably think it's a little bit of both. The best comedy that we do, or anyone does, I think, like we're talking about, it exposes that truth, and it kind of makes people think like, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking myself. I just couldn't articulate it in that way, and it makes it very accessible. And then the downside of social media and how immediate things are is that people can then take that truth and then turn it into their own perception of the truth and their own message. But I think in some ways that furthers the conversation in an interesting way. And especially because people are so connected and things are happening so quickly and trending topics, become trending topics like that. It's, I think in responsible hands, it really furthers the conversation. In irresponsible hands, it just becomes more noise that you have to get past.
It's also populist access. What Funny or Die and I think The Onion and Daily Show, the greats do is they trick people into learning about their government. And they make it funny. So there was I don't know if you saw, these guys did a great thing on the sequester, right? All of Washington was up in arms about the sequester. No one else knew what the damn sequester was. And in this art of kind of spoofing on Washington's like narcissistic arrogance about the sequester to an empty press room who didn't care, they actually taught you what was in the sequester. You couldn't help but understand what the sequester was basically about after watching. And if any of our former political leaders got on television and tried to explain the sequester, the channel would be flicked right away. And I think if you read, it is the artful interweaving of satire and fact. If you just read The Onion, you kind of know what's going on. Now, you may have a particularly twisted view of some of the issues, but you understand, it is setting the political agenda by resonating with, I think, what those key trending questions are. I think a lot of people are getting their basic news from those sources.
It's also interesting when I come here, and I'm fortunate to be a part of these meetings, you guys are just so in it, and there's so much nuance, and all the politics and the gossip and who's responsible for what. And the vast majority of the world just doesn't really care about that. So if we're able, and I don't think they should, I think there's ways to not care about those things, but also be proactive in how you're a part of the process. And I think we're able to kind of take those things and hopefully, work them down to a kernel of truth and a simple message that then can have a creative spin to it. So then hopefully people do learn those things and they do think about it and share it or talk to people about it or whatever it might be. But I think that's also the value with an outside perspective and a comedic perspective is you can do those things to kind of initiate the conversation in a broader way.
We're going to get back to that. May I call you George?
Please.
You call me Mr. Galifianakis. Did conservatives find Herblock funny? Now, I'm talking about
Yeah.
did they find him funny. I'm not talking about did they agree with him. Did they find him funny?
I think often, but it was in this film we interview Brit Hume and David Brooks, and they really respected his. I think we could almost say genius, but they often were a little bit repelled by his point of view. I mean, David Brooks rather makes an intelligent criticism of a cartoon of Reagan, where it has something to do with cutting out the school milk program, and there are two little girls. I forget just how it worked, but David made the case that Reagan may have cut the milk from the program, but he really was not insensitive to little girls. David makes it a little better than I do, but not persuasively.
Well, I'll share an anecdote with you guys, and then I want to hear, especially from Mr. Bipartisan here.
I can swivel.
I had occasion to meet Ari Fleischer one time. It happened to be out. I was invited at 6, and he asked me, he said, "Why are most comedians liberal? Why do they vote liberal? Why are their sensibilities liberal?" And I'd actually thought about it a little bit because I think we can all agree that by and large that's true. And I responded I said, I think that creativity requires a level of freedom. By the way, welcome to another episode of Nick Galifianakis Quotes Himself. Creativity requires a level of freedom that the conservative mind is often uncomfortable with. This was my way of explaining why creative people, 90 whatever percent of them fall into sort of liberal sensibilities, and then you have Chuck Norris on the other side.
I've got Meatloaf. What about Meatloaf? 2 out of 3 ain't bad. That's good stuff.
So is political humor inherently, and I guess with the larger question of creativity, but political humor inherently liberal?
So I would say no. And I'm not disagreeing with the entire construct. But I mean, some of the best political humorists, Bob Dole, best comic timing in America. I think political humor is fundamentally the fearless attack on power. I think political humor is populist. I think there are times in American history where the conservative party has been seen more in that kind of pantheon of the authoritarian voice, and so you have the liberal critique. But if you look at what's happening today, the populist outrage in this country is not coming from the left. It's coming from disenfranchised, angry folks who think, Barack Obama and the big bankers cut a deal for Wall Street and screwed Main Street. I mean, the Tea Party at its essence is the alienated, angry voice of a populist, and they love making fun of Obama.
Are they funny?
So you should look at there's a political website called Town Hall. It's a conservative political website, and it has a collection of conservative political cartoons, and yeah, they're pretty good. I think there are times today in which a certain facet of kind of the anti-government governance. So there's a faction of the Republican House right now that's not so excited about governing. They don't like the way it's been done, and they're perceived as just a rejection, of the whole. These are the guys, some of them I was joking with, Mike, who kind of sleep in their offices because they don't want to even have the taint of renting, let alone owning a home in Washington. They're a little easier to make fun of. I mean, they're a pretty easy target, but there is ample amounts of distasteful and destructive behavior on the left to ridicule as well. Whether you find them funny may be the ear of the beholder, as much as the voice.
I think that's actually a little bit of a good lead-in, not to assume that a socially the Funny or Die site is liberal or not, but
you can assume that.
but piggybacking on that, I think
Could we cue up, it was a little earlier than I wanted to, but could we cue up the Funny or Die clip? I'll get out of the way again.
Something terrible is happening.
Something terrible is happening.
Something
terrible is happening.
Health insurance executives are getting a bad rap.
As the healthcare debate heats up,
We need to remember who the real victims are. Health insurance executives.
People are saying a lot of mean things about health insurance companies and their executives. And it's gonna stop.
these great businessmen are American heroes.
So why is Obama trying to reform healthcare when insurance companies are doing just fine, making billions of dollars of profit?
Obama, why?
Insurance companies need our support because they keep our selfish priorities in check when we can't.
Please, doctor, my daughter's dying. She needs medication.
Let somebody else for once.
If my kid falls off his bike and breaks his leg, he should have to pay that money out of pocket, out of his allowance.
How else is he going to fall off that bike?
And insurance companies are detail-oriented enough to deny claims for things like typos. If you spell something wrong, do you really deserve surgery? 80% of the American public support the public plan because it would give quality care people can actually afford.
But when you think about it, who's really supporting it, other than 80% of the American people?
And the public option would make insurance companies lower their prices and give better service in order to compete.
What's so American about competition?
But health insurance companies are huge.
They need to make big profits so they can afford to give their employees health insurance.
Believe me, that's
It makes sense.
Insurance company CEOs have a right to their American dream.
And 5 houses.
A private plane.
$500 million in your pocket?
And a mini zoo in your backyard with exotic animals like a white tiger and 80 horses.
Insurance companies offer you variety.
They can change the price and terms of your plan at any time and stop covering you altogether.
Do you want to get rid of those options?
So join us in the fight to protect our insurance company profits. We've looked out for our best interests for so long.
Now we should look out for theirs.
I'm not being sarcastic.
That's great.
That was funny. They have found political cartoons and graffiti on the walls of Pompeii. True. And it's funny stuff. Probably liberals. Mike, are these the walls of Pompeii?
So dramatic. Well, I can't say no. Yeah, I mean, what we're fortunate to be able to do is work with very talented people, and they are driven to comment about what's going on in the world. That's a piece that we made a few years ago. There was a more current piece that didn't quite fit into the program today, but maybe next time we'll show that.
I think there's a pattern to this program.
So yes, I think, you know, we're able to take professional people that do this, and we produce all these videos, but the vast majority of our content is still user-generated content. And I think just like those people, you know, spray painting on the walls of Pompeii, it's never been easier to make something, whether it's a video, to have a blog, to have a Twitter feed, to have an Instagram thread, whatever it is, it's so much easier to get your voice and your point of view out there. And whether it's comedic or serious or somewhere in between, I guess that's why I keep on coming back to. I guess the difference between when Mr. Block was creating his commentary and where it is now, it's thematically very similar, but I think there's just more participation. And I think videos like that can help inform that.
Well, that's the technological end of it. What about the actual, I mean, keeping with talking about humor in politics as opposed to a drier commentary? One could do that straighter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sort of a 3-minute, I don't know how long that was, about 2.5 minutes, 3-minute sort of soundbite about this is what the insurance industry is doing to you. Is that as effective as
No,
what
and that's why Herb Block has a documentary about him, because when you're able to tear down those walls with comedy and have people relate to it and laugh and think about it in that way, people are just so desensitized to standard PSAs and messages because there's just so much of it going on. Things don't go viral unless you have an emotional reaction, typically laughing, and you want to share that laughter with someone else, whether it's a political piece like that or a cat on the treadmill. It's the same feeling. And I think, that's why comedy travels so well on the internet, and why it travels, internationally about some of these policies, because it's not a straightforward approach. It's something that the average person can find more accessible and can, in a way, see themselves in it.
Herb Block wrote about the question you asked, or he was asked the question and responded to it, and we use it in the film. And I brought the quote because and it asked basically, are you a liberal?
Oh.
And Herb said, well, if you're going to classify people that way, okay, I suppose I'm liberal. But I have been called by many people a conservative because I really adhere to the old-fashioned ideas about how the country should be run, which is a very conservative, in other words, Herb was looking for justice and fairness and the things that are written in the Constitution. And so I think you can be both liberal and conservative.
And you're wondering how I'm going to bridge those two thoughts together, aren't you?
No, I've got
Look, what I was going to just offer up, and I think it goes a little bit on what Mike was saying, is that it ultimately it's all about power. It's always about power in one form or another. And humor is wonderfully democratic in that it is really the means by which we can humiliate the leadership. It is regaining the power for the population.
Why is there a need to do that?
Because we, writ large, especially at this moment in history, feel very alienated and victimized by the government, right? Congress has a 9% approval rating, and most people wonder, well, who the heck are those people, right? It's slightly worse than cockroaches. When people come up with these kinds of, viral videos, or, the kinds of, even just listen to the stuff on the Tonight Show, there's a sense that you're back in charge. So if you were going to get, Tom Daschle, one of our founders, one of the most articulate people about, healthcare in America, a big supporter of President Obama, had he provided a very cogent litany of all the benefits of the Affordable Care Act, to most people in America, that would be another political leader lecturing me. What we saw there was parody. And in the act of parody, it put the people back in charge. And I think the ability to learn is much greater when you feel in control. When you're feeling threatened and victimized, people tend to shut down. So I think what humor does is it flips the power.
So then let me ask this.
Can I toss in another Herb Block so I could use them both? I've got them on the same card. But I think it connects to what Jason said. Herb said, in opposing corruption, suppression of rights, and abuse of government office, the political cartoon has always served as a special prod, a reminder to public servants that they are, after all, public servants. And, I think that's, I think a lot of political humor is addressed to the public servants, and a lot of it's, I'm sure, your agenda is always kind of looking for hypocrisy. And that's a big part of political humor.
So why is humor the best way to, and the reason I say best way is it seems to be very, very effective in getting the truth across, to hold public servants accountable. Why isn't...
shouting?
Yeah. Or... Exactly, or the gentleman, or my friend, why does that not work
Well, so
at
first
all?
of all, we should acknowledge that shouting is working pretty well too, right? Honestly, right? If you look at the...
polarize the society?
Yeah, depending on what your goals are. So we can't diminish the effectiveness in some people's use of shouting. humor is more memorable, and I think it catches people up short and it gets to the essence.
So I was going to, there was a poll released a couple of years ago by the Pew Research Center for people in the press. 21% of people, and I'm sure this, my guess is this might actually have increased since then, even though it's just a couple of years ago. 21% of people between the ages of 18 and 29 cited The Daily Show and Saturday Night Live as a place where they regularly learned about the presidential debates that had just occurred. By contrast, 23% of young people mentioned ABC or CBS or any of the traditional stations, broadcast news, as their source. Is this a good thing? Is this a trend? Is it fashion? Is it a good thing? Is it bad?
It is.
Take it on. We can start with Mike. More people are going to your
well,
site.
Whether it's good or bad, I think it's just the facts. So I feel like, it feels very normal to me because that's how, I guess I'm in that group. So that's how I get my news. I'm one of probably the few people who actually like to watch the nightly news in my age group because I do like getting that as well. But most people, we don't watch the news to get ideas for videos that we make on Funny or Die. We don't watch the news. We're online. We're seeing what people are talking about on Twitter or BuzzFeed or something along those lines. So I just think as the whole consumer media pie has shifted and so much power is now in the consumer to watch and read whatever they want, wherever they want on their mobile device, that is a trend that's going to get more and more, more and more large because it's not about going home and having dinner with your family at 6:30 and watching, we used to watch Peter Jennings in my house and I loved it, but that's not what it means anymore. And also because there is so many news sources, you just get desensitized and there's so much saturation. Before, when it was just 3 people that you trusted for the news, that's what made sense. But the playing field has been leveled with MSNBC and Fox and everyone, like Jason is saying, shouting so loudly. It's just very easy for younger audiences to tune that out and kind of find the news the way they want to find it.
The other thing that's important, the implication of the poll is 23 people are doing Daily Show, and that's more than watching Charlie Rose. And would it be better if they were all watching Charlie Rose? But that's of course not the real question. It's are you watching the Daily Show or not paying attention to the news at all? So in other words, I don't think your choice is this young set being distracted from National Journal by The Onion. It's a question of they want The Onion or I don't know. I got a 10-year-old. I don't know what tweens do anymore, but. I think it's fundamentally good because I think it is bringing more people into the public debate.
Do you think anything gets lost? I remember the transition from, just to use it as the paper we all know, the New York Times to USA Today, basically television and newspaper form, where there were no jumps. The stories were on one page. There was no jumping to another page to continue the story. So you were getting it all in this thing. And so with this funny delivery that the Herblocks and the Carvers of Pompeii and Mike and his crew are doing, is anything getting lost as far as, certainty? Sure.
Well, who among us in the museum, right? So this is a real representative audience here. The museum doesn't wish that there was more long-form journalism. But this is a microcosm that does. This is about all of us. There's about 78 of us here in Washington, and that's pretty much it. So, woe is us. We all have ample opportunities to listen to NPR reruns, on our iPods. But so what?
So is that a special problem? Get the 3-dimensionality of your political point across in a funny way without, totally shaving it down to nothing?
I think, just to go back, I think some things have been lost, but I think other things are being gained because you're now not just reliant on traditional media to get stories out in an effective way. And I think there's a lot of value to that. What's your question about? What was the second question? I was thinking about my answer when you were asking me the question. I totally zoned out.
I just came back from
You're
Greece.
so not from
I'm
DC.
jet lagged.
You would never admit that if you're from DC.
I admit my failings quite often. I have no problem with that.
My question was, is it a special challenge? And then I'm going to follow up with you, George, too, with Herblock. Is it a special challenge to get the depth, breadth, and three-dimensionality of an issue across and still have it be funny and quickly digestible and social media friendly?
Yeah, I think there is a response. I think we take seriously the responsibility of trying to satirize something effectively and smartly. And certainly there might be a point of view and perspective, but we would never lie to our audience about what it is we're trying to get across. And I think when people see the truth in those things, authentic is a word that's come up quite often. I think they appreciate that. So they're laughing, and like Jason is saying, they're also learning something about it, and it is a responsibility. But at the same time, you know, if it's not funny, no one's going to care. People like comedy because people like to laugh. So you can have all the great ideas and the great messaging and the fancy people involved, but unless it's funny, no one's going to share things. And whether you have 7 million people on Twitter like Funny or Die or 5, unless something is connecting with people emotionally from that place of comedy, no one's going to want to share it. So you have to balance all these things. And also, and while you're doing all that, not overthink the comedy. You know, the piece that we just showed is a pretty simple piece, you know, joke-wise and entry point-wise. And because people have such short attention spans now, you want to get into things quickly and have them get it and get a few laughs out of it and hope they watch the full 2 minutes, because 2 minutes online is kind of an eternity. That's sad but true.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, you brought to mind something. I think it was Victor Borge. I may be wrong, but he said the laughing is the shortest distance between two strangers.
Mm.
And I think that's what you just.
He said it much better, but yes, that's what I was trying to say.
It's also true that comedy is the new long-form journalism. I mean, the initial segment on The Daily Show, they do 6 or 7 minute spots. Where do you see? I mean, they did a 7-minute thing on immigration reform last night. What news show tries to talk about one thing for 7 minutes? Now, it's funny, but it's a 7-minute commentary on the immigration reform debate. So, you know, maybe Cokie Roberts will learn something. Maybe this is where we're going.
George, I love being able to call you George, by the way. At the premiere tonight, it'll be Mr. Stevens again. But now Herblock, in one panel, on one day, can get across mounds. In listening to Mike talk, I was thinking that maybe Herblock, there's a sort of a, once you start stringing his cartoons together over a week, a month, a year, and decades, that there's sort of a collective scream that adds up to his message and what he was about.
That's why we made the film. I should say that film is directed by Michael Stevens, my son, who's very talented. And he used to sign his books to Liz and me, and so I had these books. And so when we started the film, I was going through bookshelves, and here's one, they're all over the house. And I opened one, and it said, "To Michael Stevens, a fellow writer." And I remember Michael had won a prize in the 9th grade for the English, and I told Herb. And so Herb signed this book. And the beautiful irony is that the person who's written and directed his biography is the young person he described that book to and called a fellow writer. I lost track in my preamble. Your question was?
You and I are on the same. Yeah. I just flew in from Greece. By the way, this is true. So I'm jet lagged. It's 5 o'clock in Greece for me is like 1967 right now or something like that. So, no, I asked about the collective impact because of the short form that we're talking about, because humor has to be inherently short.
And that's why we made the film, because when you see the film and you hear these really smart people testify to Herb's integrity, and they call him, refer to him as a patriot, and he really and to understand that you can be a, quote, patriot, and be humorous and irreverent. So these, and, as Tom Brokaw said, you open the Washington Post, and God, I used to sometimes couldn't wait to get to the office and call Herb and say, God, you knocked it out of the park. And it wasn't always, that he was after Nixon or McCarthy. I mean, civil rights and money in politics. He was, onto all of these things. And, one of those ones that shows that he was not totally devoted to one, he was really non-political, that during a budget battle with the president and the Congress in the 90s, Herb had a cartoon, and its title was Balance. And Clinton was on a tightrope. And in one hand, he had the budget, and in the other hand, he had Monica Lewinsky. I mean, you talk about, impact.
One of the quotes I loved out of the trailer was from Lewis Black, where he said, what he's able to do in such a short amount of time makes the length of the pieces that we make on The Daily Show look silly. And I think that's a very astute observation, because that visual that George just described says it all, and everything after that kind of just becomes the same point told slightly differently, but at its core, it's the same message.
Yeah. But I would just like to speak to the work that Mike and his colleagues are doing, and Jon Stewart. I think The Daily Show and this stuff is brilliant. I think it is, having an impact. And if only that people are lined up to be able to be in that studio with John, and you can't be not interested in the news in the world and get the jokes. So it's not an uninformed audience that The Daily Show is reaching, nor would yours be.
What about this? I'm going to pick up on that a little bit. What about the style, George? For example, 110 years ago, 115 years ago, when a woman was out in public, she showed an ankle. It was very, very provocative, enticing, sexy.
Mm-hmm.
Today, of course, it's got to be something very, a little bit more than an ankle. Do you, in your, Herb Block comes from that earlier time period. You were a young man in the, I'm not going to say when, but
100 years ago, when those
right.
we were looking for the ankle.
Right. So these sensibilities have obviously changed over the course of your life. These humorous sensibilities. So you still you appreciate The Daily Show and Funny or Die, clips like this. It's not offensive.
Politics has always been. It's always been tough, right? So the great statesmen, in the election of 1800, Jefferson and Adams. Jefferson refers to Adams as a hermaphrodite who has neither the firmness of a man nor the sensibilities of a woman, right? Thomas Jefferson, he signed the Declaration of Independence, right? So this isn't new. I think the mediums are much different.
There's a woman there that wants my autograph. Hold on. Yes.
I would love to ask a question about reach. And I think you mentioned the number, Funny or Die has 70 million?
I wish, 7 million. I like how you embellish our stats, though. That's nice.
But still, 7 million is nothing. I would love to know, if Herb Block was tweeting today or on Funny or Die, what kind of numbers do you think he'd get? Or, is it about quality? Is it about quantity? How does reach change the message?
It's a good question.
You think Herb would funny or?
Definitely funny. Though I think you would have been disappointed with, the audience online is, all you have to do is look at comments on a YouTube or Funny or Die video. This is not, I would not imagine this crowd is writing the vast majority of those comments, because a lot of the internet is about lowest common denominator things. And as silly as the videos that we make at Funny or Die are, we're considered like a premium voice, which is kind of depressing in its own way. But yeah, certainly the reach is huge. I mean, what we were able to do for Hollywood, when Funny or Die, when Will Ferrell and Adam McKay started Funny or Die 6 years ago, I joined 5 years ago. The internet was online content was a very new thing. YouTube had only been around less than a year, and the ability to stream video was a very new thing. And Hollywood moves very slowly. I mean, it's kind of like DC in that way. Like, people don't like change because change brings about ways that they can make less money, and everyone wants to make money. So what we were able to do with Funny or Die is, and Will Ferrell, we were talking about earlier, his very first video, The Landlord, which has been seen about 100 million times, where Adam McKay's daughter is asking him for the rent in very aggressive terms. When that happened, no one had ever seen a movie star like Will Ferrell on the internet in a grainy home video looking piece of content. And it started to just kind of tear down the walls that things like Twitter really continue, because everyone's so much more accessible now, for better or worse. And so what we were able to do within Hollywood is take this thing that's scary, online video and the internet, and how are you going to get paid for it, and work with people in a kind of traditional Hollywood sense of collaborating and shooting and having a professional feel to things, but then also get these things seen. Because if you're out there making stuff, it's very easy to get lost in just the whole world that is the internet. And that's part of the problems that YouTube is having now with some of their premium content, is that no one can really find it. So the ability to curate and then get that out to a wide audience is huge. And what's been nice about Funny or Die is that the success has been really organic. You can have all the fancy numbers and analytics that you want, but unless you're truly making things that people just want to share in the oldest, like in ways of like oral history style, just sharing, there's not much of a point. And we've been fortunate to kind of find that point. And that's not to say all of our videos are huge hits, but you know, the average month on Funny or Die gets about 60 million visitors. So something's working.
Can I ask why you left what you were doing to go to Funny or Die? You must have had a...
Yeah, it was easy because I didn't have a job.
Oh.
I had been running
and he had a sense of humor. Okay.
I had been running a production company at Paramount, and that deal ended with the writer's strike in 2007. Right. It's fascinating to think that people were actually going on strike about the internet in 2007. It's just silly to think about. But there were no jobs, which was great, and I was on unemployment, which I had never really thought about. But it's like someone was just sending me a check to do nothing every month, which was a great thing because I didn't need much to live on.
Like
and
politician.
Yeah. And I just started making a lot of online content with my brother, who's a writer and director, and other comedians that we were friends with. And Funny or Die ended up featuring a lot of the things that I was producing, and that's how I got my job there. So I feel very fortunate that happened. But again, the internet allows you to make things and get the things that you're out there doing seen, and that's what got me my job.
Before I throw this to the audience, I'm going to take questions now, piggybacking on Ms. Reach. You reminded me of something that I read a while ago. Dr. Neil Postman wrote a book 30 years ago or so called Amusing Ourselves to Death. In 1985, it was pre sort of everybody in the internet, of course, and he wrote in the foreword, in the introduction, he wrote, "The truth will always be out there. It will simply be lost in a sea of irrelevancy." Mm-hmm. Question?
On
yes.
that relevancy point?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Gentlemen, do you think it's a problem that politics and humor, and certainly the intersection of the two, continue to be so male-dominated?
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think it's a big problem. Now, the good news is that we're seeing some very strong women, particularly in the U.S. Senate, start to anchor a lot of the debates. Former Senator Olympia Snowe, unfortunately left the Senate, but has now come and joined us at the BPC, and so we're spending a lot of time with her and thinking also about the role and the voice of women in the political debate. I think it is true that a lot of the kind of humor that we're talking about does tend to have a very kind of male ethos. And I'd be interested to know from Mike what percentage of the content would you say is coming with from led by women. There certainly is not easy for women.
Followed by women, for that matter.
And if you look at the big fancy gridiron dinners and correspondence dinners, I mean, they are very much it's very much a male-dominated activity.
Yeah, the demographics on Funny or Die are actually more even splitting than you would think, which is nice. And yeah, it's certainly a problem. There's always so much talk about females in comedy and female comedians and what's it like to be a woman in comedy. If you're in comedy, you don't think about it that way. It's just your job and you're trying to do it well. And we work with female comedians and all comedians. And certainly, based on your gender, you're going to have, or race or where you're from, you're going to have a certain perspective that other people might not have. But that's why we love making all this stuff. We end up making about 20 to 25 original videos a month. And if it's something that someone's passionate about making and it's funny and it's something that we just think the world should see, we don't think about it much more deeply than that. Most comedians, guy or girl or whatever, just want to make their friends laugh and hope that by making their friends laugh, they'll get other people to laugh. So it's certainly an issue, but I think one that's getting better every day just because of some of the themes we've already talked about in terms of accessibility and I mean, people are getting signed to write for TV shows just based on a funny Twitter feed, and that's fantastic. They might not be good TV writers. They might not be great TV writers, but their voice is getting them opportunities, and then maybe it leads to something else. And it's getting, because so much of what we do comes down to access and being discovered, and you can use these tools to obviously help your chances.
And it goes back to how the world is becoming more and more and more interactive. Mm-hmm. The consumer is becoming the producer as well.
Yeah, it's great.
I just have a quick question. I've always sort of experienced sort of a culture of political correctness that sometimes makes it difficult to talk about certain issues. And I was wondering how you think humor can help open up dialogues that usually are sort of people are reticent to talk about because there's just no language to really do that in a sensitive and way that doesn't put people, like, pit them against each other.
I mean, I think Washington uses humor in a couple of important ways. A lot of it is not politically correct. I think a lot of the stuff that actually is seen as funny allows you to kind of pierce that veil of political correctness. But something else that humor does that's very important is it's humanizing in that kind of self-deprecatory way. So, I think one of the big problems with Washington is the detachment of Washington from the common people and living in these bubbles of narcissistic self-fulfillment. The good politicians know how to make fun of themselves. And if you even look through the presidential debates, I mean, some of the best lines have come when Obama and Romney actually kind of stepped back. Actually, I would just point to one, it's a little bit off point, but I think it's worth noting. If you look back at those presidential debates, so the first debate, Obama was thought to be kind of asleep. The second debate, they almost looked like they were going to hit each other. This was Candy Crowley was the umpire. I think it was, at Hofstra University. 3 days later, they went to the Alfred E. Smith dinner, which is one of these, classic, I always call it the Alfred E. Newman dinner, but it's actually the Alfred E. Smith dinner. And they were funny. Obama said, I'm well rested because I took a nap at the first debate. Romney says, I usually only get invited to these things as the designated driver. They then zinged each other a little bit. And I remember Romney's best line was, after the Sesame Street thing, today's event is being brought to you by the letter O and the number 16 trillion, going after the debt stuff. I mean, it was funny. And then they went to the third debate 3 days later, and it was an absolutely different atmosphere. And I believe pretty firmly that it was that moment. I mean, they were really almost felt like they were coming to blows at the second debate. And then they got to know each other in public. They made fun of each other, they made fun of themselves, and they couldn't sustain that anger and that intensity from that second debate. So I think it is more than just playful. And I think the role of humor and the ability to laugh at oneself and kind of take the politicians off those pedestals and bring them down to earth a little bit is pretty generative to getting people to collaborate. So I don't know if that's political correctness, but it certainly makes the policymaking process work better.
What's also great too is, especially when it comes to social issues, those types of things so over-index online, whether you're in favor of them or really against them, that I think it gets a lot of people talking. I mean, when we do things with prominent gay or lesbian actors or about social issues, and typically it's very positive, but it becomes this great piece in this lightning rod to get people thinking about those things in a different way. And was it Biden who talked about Will and Grace and the effect of having Sean Hayes' character as being gay on that show? It's fantastic because the more you know about alternative lifestyles, the less alternative it feels. And if we're able to kind of do that for any sort of issue and make that awareness known and that familiarity, I think it takes people one step closer to accepting this is the world they're living in.
It's also become a big part of the political apology. So oftentimes you see politicians will weave their way back from a gaffe with a joke. So Obama, there was a picture of him skeet shooting a while ago, which a lot of people made a lot of fun of, right? That this was during the gun debate, that he was no wimp. And his response was, well, you guys are also cynical. Next week my campaign's going to release a picture of me clinging to religion. Going back to the comment he made in San Francisco about how conservatives, alienated clean. And, I think it's an opportunity oftentimes. Cheney famously quipped that his wife Lynn asked whether it bothered him that he kept being compared to Darth Vader. And he said no, he thought I actually found it quite humanizing for him. So there's some way there that I think people engage. There's self-awareness.
Let's go to this side for a moment.
I was just wondering, we were talking about her block and all the work that he's done in the past. And I was just wondering if you guys could actually take on the persona of her block and actually think of what the cartoon or the commentary would be today.
George, did you hear that?
I think they're doing it. I think Jon Stewart is doing it. Exact same issues that her block would be dealing with. They just do it in a different fashion, and extremely skillfully, I think.
He'd be all over the NSA stuff, I imagine. I mean,
yeah.
He would also love do you know what a meme is? He would love memes because it's taking something that's already out in the media and manipulating it in a way and kind of putting a comment over it that is essentially an internet political cartoon.
Yeah.
The Onion, I thought, in a very Herb Blockian way, was commenting on the NSA stuff and basically said that in reviewing people's records, a lot of people found out they were paying far too much for their internet.
It is interesting that cartoonists are not, there's no one who has, a fraction of Herb's influence. I mean, Herb was in the Washington Post every day and in 150 other newspapers. There's a very good cartoonist at Politico, Matt Worker. But unfortunately, it hasn't, taken off.
Well, there's so much to compete with now.
Exactly.
When the camera came along.
Talkies.
Yeah, and talkies, and I mean it's part of that. Pat Oliphant was probably the last to sort of have that kind of approach, that kind of heft. But he's still working now, but he's not the national conversation like he used to be. But Funny or Die is, and so I think we're just in the middle of that.
And that's why you're here and Pat Oliphant isn't.
Evolution.
I don't know who Pat is, but
That's very funny. It's actually. Yes.
That segues right into my question. Editorial cartooning. Oh, gee, thank you. A microphone. Editorial cartooning combines three skills, really: drawing well, being funny, and keeping up with the news. Herb was, of course, very good at all three. What do you think about the future of editorial cartooning in an age when newspapers are an endangered species?
Yeah, I was going to say, Clarence Page with the Washington Post, a couple of thoughts himself.
Chicago Tribune.
Sorry, my apologies. My apologies. I guess you proved my point.
I don't know which one's an upgrade or a downgrade.
We're all endangered.
George, the history of editorial cartoons. I mean, you're literally showing the history of editorial cartoons tonight, but the future of it.
Well, I think it's a difficult time for the kind of thing that the people we're talking about, incidentally, who are almost invariably men, to your point.
Some women, though. There are some women out there.
Are there? They haven't. I haven't seen them, but I think the impact of political cartooning is somewhat eclipsed right now.
I think that drawing well is actually the least of, and I, as someone who happens to draw, better than the average person, I think it's the least of those requirements, of those qualities. I think the need to comment, and the need to comment in an honest way. This is the issue. How do I feel about that issue? Okay, I'm going to interpret that in such a way that you are going to see that issue through my eyes. That's an editorial cartoon. Now it's being done with video, or it's being done with clever wording in tweets, which comes with its own little frame and parameters. So I don't think it's dying. I think it's dying, or
dying up?
Evolving, yes, exactly, in its current form. The question about connecting it to newspapers is almost another, it's a cousin conversation to it, I think. It's, we're moving from the horse and buggy to the car. And so it still has wheels, and there are people riding in it still. It's just a matter of finding, the political cartoonist from 50 years ago who's born today is going to find the current way to express himself. A commentator and an artist is of their day. So I think that's where we are with this huge sea change. Yes?
So in a time where between cable media and internet, people are selecting and filtering so their information so much so that you end up preaching to the choir, what makes a great political satirist rise up so that they can go beyond just their targeted audience?
Now that goes to the question I asked about Herblock. Did conservatives find him? Did they get him? So what does political humor transcend? Jason? You were waving the flag of the other side for a little while to balance it out.
Again, I don't have the data, right? I mean, I think there's a little bit of a simple assumption that, only people who vote, Democrat, watch The Daily Show and Colbert. I don't think that's true. I mean, Colbert is an interesting caricature, right? And I think I certainly am. I can just tell you about my own experience. By the sample size, we have 80 staff in our office. We are aggressively bipartisan. So, I got folks who used to lobby for the NRA and the Sierra Club coming to work every day together. They watch Saturday Night Live. They watch, Daily Show. I think where there's a split tends to be, the Fox, MSNBC. I mean, it's the traditional news stuff where there's more of a division. So I'm actually not convinced that it is just factually true that Republicans are not engaging in the kind of dominant, I mean, we got The Onion on our table next to the National Journal. So I don't know. I'm not sure I buy the premise.
Well, we've been given the sign here that we're wrapping it up, and so based on your "It's a Wonderful World" painting there, I think
Everybody
it's a good
swivel
place.
with me. Everybody swivel.
I think it's a good place to end it. Thank you for tolerating me and listening to these wonderful speakers and coming out today.